It's a very exciting session we've got for you today. We're going to see some exclusive clips from this year's panel. Some of what you're going to see hasn't yet been on. It's come straight from the edit, so that's a great privilege. And we're going to be talking, amongst other things, about event television, about new ways of using talent. No specialist factual panel would be complete without talking about innovation and risk, so we'll be touching on those. And, of course, talking about how in this very fast-changing and sometimes quite uncertain feeling world that we're currently in, whether specialist factual should be responding to that and whether it needs to be topical. And one of the commissioners, you can guess who, it will become apparent later, is going to complain that the ideas that they are receiving are neither big nor ambitious enough. Who is that? But there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, of course, directly to the panel throughout the session, so please do be ready with those. And I've got some questions of my own, sent to me anonymously by indie producers, some of whom are working with you, some of whom are not, but all of whom do not want to put their name to the question. So be prepared for that. But today, let me introduce you to the panel. We have Lucy Willis, who is commissioning editor for Factual at Channel 5. Next to her, we have John Hay, who is head of Specialist Factual at Channel 4. A relatively new job for you, John.
Just a year.
Yeah, just a year into that. We have Hamish Mykura, who is Executive Vice President of Programming and Development, National Geographic. Is that right?
Pretty accurate.
Excellent. Ed Sayer, who is head of Original Commissioning, Discovery Networks International. And that's very important, isn't it, Ed? Because you are not Discovery, because you are rest of world.
Correct.
Absolutely. And Tom McDonald, who is head of Commissioning, Natural History and Specialist Factual for the BBC. Last year, Tom was here, and he'd been in that role for one day.
One day.
Now it's a year and a day, and we'll see what a difference a year has made.
I know less now than I did a year ago, I think.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see, Tom.
See.
Everyone's here to judge you. So with the exception of Hamish, though, the eagle-eyed amongst you will see that the rest of the panel is the same specialist factual panel as was here this time last year. But what a year it has been. Last time you were here, David Cameron was still Prime Minister, and who knows who's Prime Minister now. Obama was still president, and the last terror attack in Britain had been 9 years ago, and not, as you know, as we feel now, which is a very different time for us. But my question to you all is, things have changed very fast in the outside world, but in Specialist Factual on your channels, what has changed? So could you each just tell me in a headline way, so a programme or a couple of programmes which have been on or which you've commissioned in the last 12 months, which really reflect the direction of travel, if you like, for Specialist Factual on your channel. So, Lucy.
Well, I don't know if they reflect the direction of travel, but there's two things that I wanted to mention because they feel kind of quite new and fresh for us. So the first one is the Rome series that we have recently commissioned, and that looks at the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic through 8 pivotal days that somehow sum up the empire. And what's really interesting, I think, for us about Rome is that sort of, a year or two ago, Channel 5 would have done 3 or 4 parts, but actually we sat down and decided we were really going to make a big commitment to history. We've supersized it. It's an 8-part series, which we hope, fingers crossed, will feel quite blue chip and will feel quite reputational for us. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention really briefly is a new series that will be going out later in the year, which is Pompeii. We've become increasingly interested at Channel 5 in event television. So we had Great Fire, which I'm going to talk about a bit later, on last week, the week before, I think it was. And Pompeii, again, is a piece of event history stripped over 3 nights. Again, that's something that we haven't done before. So it feels like a sort of, fresh new departure for us.
John, event television or 8-part series coming down track or been on for you?
Well, the biggest thing that's happened to us in the last year is half the team's new. So it's just worth saying that Sarah Ramsden's still there commissioning science and specialist factual events. Rob Colstream's commissioning history, but Alf Laurie has joined us to commission travel and adventure, and Shaminder Nahar's come in to commission topical specialist factual. So that's the team. But as far as the output goes, we're still, the last year, we've still been doing the things we do best. We've got big returners that have found new twists. We've got our big new series, Mutiny, Royal House of Windsor Spies. We've got standout singles, Bear Hunt, Interview the Murderer, things we went Has Political Correctness Gone Mad, Earth from Space. But to show you the direction of travel, I should probably talk about the three things that we've announced today, which are obviously not aired yet. They're new commissions. One is called A Year of British Murder. That's from Arrow. That is an attempt, a sort of feature-length film that is going to try and use murder as a lens on British society now. One is The Channel from Blast. That's a sort of how it works specialist factual programme, but going to the busiest shipping lane in the world, going to our pinch point with Europe at the year when that's all changing. So that's a sort of against a very strongly topical background. And then we're doing a 4-part series on Trump from 72 films, which is our attempt to sort of tell the history of modern America through one man, with a bit of the ambition in archive, collage and storytelling of some of these sort of Asif Kapadia work or the OJ series. And we've got a big series on AI coming in the autumn. So what all of those... I mean, it's not the only thing we do, but what we're trying to do is to broaden our slate. We've been very sort of male and fact-tense skewed in the past. We're trying to get broader than that, and to sort of focus more on the contemporary and the topical. Because I think on 4, obviously it's the youngest terrestrial, we should be very, very zeroed in on what's happening now and next, and on holding big bits of the contemporary world up to scrutiny.
So we're going to come back later in the session to just drilling down a bit into all the different commissioners you have in your team, because I think it would be useful for people to hear about their individual responsibilities and how the department works. But Hamish, how about for you?
Well, I mean, National Geographic is an international channel. We're in 171 countries, one of which is America. So we're really trying to commission for really right across the world, including the US market, for our biggest commissions. And I mean, since last year, I guess, we've really zeroed in on this strategy of commissioning premium content, which really means fewer, bigger, better programs. And by bigger, really the budgets are well in excess of what you would pay for a terrestrial hour in the UK. And in return for that, we're expecting something which is scaled up in a way that really is unusual for this market. So, I mean, for example, we've had Mars, which was Ron Howard's series, a drama documentary on a very big scale. Presently, Genius, which is the big drama series about Albert Einstein. We've commissioned a number of things out of London on that kind of scale. One of the ones that I'm going to be talking about here tomorrow is from Tigress, which is a series about Dian Fossey. It's a good example, this series, because it kind of shows how you can take a whole number of boxes and suddenly create something which feels like a premium program. So, you know, Dian Fossey, we all remember her vaguely from having watched Gorillas in the Mist, although we can't quite remember what happened now. And she was also a National Geographic funded explorer, so she's absolutely within that yellow border that is National Geographic. In Nat Geo in the US, we found there were lots of cans of film of her that hadn't been developed and that really hadn't been catalogued, so a huge treasure trove of material about her. Plus, the story of her murder had never really been solved because of everything that subsequently happened in Rwanda with the genocide and so on. It remains a mystery to this day of what happened to her. So that gives you a kind of contemporary investigation story which you can focus on. And then in addition, once you then say, well, maybe we could get the readings all done by Sigourney Weaver and find that Sigourney Weaver is really into that idea and commits, suddenly you just feel that the lights are going green all the way down the road, and you have something which you can really get behind, really market and promote, and then it becomes worth spending an enormous budget on because you think that you're going to get the value out of that. Something that will work in all territories and something that will work in repeat for a long time. So that's quite a good example of what a National Geographic premium program can feel like.
That's a lot of boxes ticked. Ed, how are your boxes?
Well, I'm pleased to say I've got more boxes than Hamish. So obviously, Discovery is in 220 countries around the world with 2 billion
Poor
subscribers.
Tom, how's he going to compete? Yeah.
And I think everyone will be reassured to know that we're in the business of telling the biggest global stories of our time. And actually, as you intimated at the beginning of this, is that we live in uncertain times right now, and the world is changing so quickly. And it's very difficult, I think, as a commissioner to try and keep up with that pace. But actually at Discovery, I think we are doing just that. So one of the big shows that comes out on July the 6th is Mosquito, which looks at the biggest killer of the modern age. 750,000 people a year die from mosquitoes. And so we're exploring that story about what we can do with the US pulling out of the Paris Accord recently. We're talking about how global climates have changed, but also have had unforeseen effects in other areas of the world, and the mosquito growth is just one of them. And, you know, likewise, we have the very biggest names to bring that story to our audience. We've got Bill Gates, it's narrated by Jeremy Renner. So it's a really, really important story, and I think for me, it's all about stories and taking these often little-known subjects when in relation to specialist factual and giving them a much bigger, broader audience.
Tom, 200-odd countries, biggest global stories, but
So,
you've got Attenborough.
I was about to mention Attenborough. So I guess I'm going to mention 3 programs that have all broadcast, because I think in some ways they signal different directions of travel. The first one is Planet Earth 2, which was the highest rated natural history program in British television for over 15 years. The reason I mention it is not just to show off, but because I think I am showing off as well, but is because I think I've said this on panels before, but I genuinely believe that Planet Earth 2 is really good news for Specialist Factual. I think there was a belief for a period of time that Specialist Factual had to disguise what it was, sort of borrowing the clothes of the genres, which I'm all for, but to disguise what it was in order to attract an audience. I think Planet Earth 2 proves you don't have to do that. I think the viewing figures were not only extraordinary, but when you sort of drill into those viewing figures, you start to see things that I think are really interesting, which is that the 16 to 34 audience was bigger than it was for X Factor, which was on the other side at the same time. Family viewing, which is sort of an old-fashioned term, actually existed in Planet Earth 2. So I think Specialist Factual has the ability to, sort of, pardon the cheesy phrase, sort of bring the nation together. And I think that's something that certainly me and my team, and we should talk about my expanded and brilliant team in a bit, think about quite a lot. I think Planet Earth 2 has given us the confidence to go, Specialist Factual can reach the biggest and broadest audiences in the UK. Right at the other end of the spectrum, because in some ways Planet Earth 2 is about a sort of timelessness, if you like, amazing cinematography, beautiful production values, but a sort of heritage brand made modern. But at the other end of the spectrum, I'd cite Muslims Like Us, because I think for myself and Fatima and my team who commissioned it, it's a shot in the arm for religion commissioning at the BBC. I think it's pretty extraordinary that Muslims Like Us won a BAFTA for constructed factual, and it came out of the religion department. I think it's a statement of intent for us about what we're about, both in terms of topicality, but how brave we're prepared to be. I think in the past, people may have thought that the role of Channel 4 was to be brave and provocative, not the BBC's. I think Muslims Like Us proves that we are brave and that we do back titles that don't necessarily feel BBC-y. And my last example is partly a sort of reminder to myself that the audience we're serving and the way we deliver content is changing. So this time last year, on my first day in the job, I naively showed a clip from a series called Big Life Fix, which I am incredibly proud of. I suspect not many of you saw it because it didn't perform that brilliantly. But the reason I cite it is that though it was consolidating at just over 1 million, 1.2, 1.3 million, there was one clip, and in fact it was the clip that I showed here at Sheffield, which was watched via Facebook by over 40 million people. And I think there's something to be said for the way we talk about commissioning and the way we commission and the way we think about who's watching that content. And I was at an event the other week with young people talking about Big Life Fix and how sad I was that lots of people hadn't watched it. And when I started describing the clip to them, they were between 18 and 20, all of them went, I have watched it, I've seen that clip, I just had no idea it was Big Life Fix. So I think it's worth a sort of reflecting, there's probably no time now, but certainly for those of you here who are suppliers, reflecting on what that means, because it's something my team and I are grappling with.
Well, from that almost dizzying array of titles, the Specialist Factual is a very, very broad church, and it feels to me that for each of you, the way in which you tell the stories, how you're shaping your storytelling is what is perhaps giving each of your channels its individual identity for Specialist Factual. So, Lucy, would you say there's a Channel 5 identity to how stories are told?
Well, there's definitely a Channel 5 identity. And I think, our starting point always with Specialist Factual is we're a broad channel and we always commission broad, popular programming in our Specialist Factual. I should probably say, actually, what our Specialist Factual is, because unlike everyone else on the panel, first of all, I don't have a team. It's just me. And as well as commissioning Specialist Factual, I commission, other areas of programming as well. So there are certain areas of Specialist Factualing at Channel 5 that work for us and that we commission. And those are history, natural history, which is a sort of growing area for us, which is quite exciting. Travel, I think you can include in the Specialist Factual category, and actually engineering. But we don't do arts and we don't do science, really. We'll kind of find a roundabout way of doing science. So in the Great Fire programme that you'll see a clip of, we tackle science in that through the prism of history. So it's probably just worth saying that so that you all know the kind of Specialist Factual that we commission. But I think that the thing that marks us out over the other channels is that we really only commission as an entry point those broad populist subject matters. I'm not going to suddenly start doing the Georgians, or if I do, I'm going to commission them through a much more popular entry point. So, for example, our Castle series, which Dan Jones fronted, Dan would have an excuse through Dover Castle or through whichever castle he was at to look at all sorts of the sort of less, I guess, blockbustery periods of history. But we tend to focus on the very popular areas. We know our audience really well. We know what they like. And we know that sort of niche programming, much as I might personally love it at home, isn't going to resonate with our audience. So I suppose that's what marks us out, really.
Shall we have a look at your clip?
Great. So there's 2 programs on this clip. I think I might have broken the rules, but hopefully that's okay.
Thanks for those. So Elizabeth was pure drama?
Sorry?
Elizabeth, pure drama?
Well, no, it's docudrama, but I think what's really interesting about Elizabeth and what we're becoming increasingly interested in is actually it's the drama elements of Elizabeth, a scripted drama, which presents a whole host of challenges, but is, for us, an incredibly interesting melding of drama and factual, and is something that we're really excited about at Channel 5 actually. So the Rome series that I've recently commissioned will be, I guess, a supersized version in a way of Elizabeth. So again, it will be scripted drama and presented links by Bettany Hughes. So I think it's a really interesting area. I think it's an area, there were some sort of areas I think that you were going to talk about later on, but I think it's an area that resonates with young people. I think in this kind of, time of box sets and people's obsession with drama, it seems to be working with our audience. They like the drama, they like the scripted. I think it can be difficult to get it right. I think one of the things that I've noticed, which is quite interesting actually, is, no one ever wants loads of notes back from the commissioning editor. They really just want to be left on their own to make their own programme. But actually, once you get into the whole arena of scripted drama, if you think about it, if you were making a fully scripted programme, there would be a really long process of writing and rewriting and just absolutely honing and getting it right. And I think that's we're in a sort of interesting phase where there's a sort of morphing from some of those documentary sensibilities into drama sensibilities. Hopefully we sort of just about managed to get the balance right with Elizabeth.
And Tom, is drama a storytelling trope that you're using in your history?
So Lucy and I last year both showed clips from Henry VIII series.
We've moved on to Elizabeth this year.
I'd seen the clip the day before because obviously I just started in the job.
Right, yeah.
But yes, I personally find, to what Lucy's saying, I think there's a real peril with that hybrid form if you get it wrong, and I've seen it be wrong as well as right. And for me, the challenge is there is so much brilliant and incredibly well-resourced drama out there that one of the things that I'm not especially interested in is making sort of low-cost drama, because I think the audience knows that it's cheaper, that the calibre of the actors isn't the same, the calibre of the writer isn't the same. I think when we did Six Wives, which was the Lucy Worsley series, our whole take, or, you know, it was commissioned before my time, but I thought it was a brilliant series because its whole take was, we're doing this because we're going to show you something new. And watching this dramatised sequence play out with Lucy Worsley in situ will reveal something new to you. And I sort of think, you know, I'd refine it if we went again, but I think it absolutely stood up to the scrutiny of, does it tell you something new? I'm not convinced that that sort of hybrid form, we've obviously tried on BBC Two in the past, Armada, was done a couple of years ago on BBC Two, more recently 1066. I think they can feel quite messy as pieces of television, neither sort of satisfying as drama nor satisfying as factual. And I think the thing is, you know, I'm a never say never person. I think, you know, when you get it right, we did a film earlier this year called The Drug Trial, which was a retelling of what is sort of known as the Elephant Men trial 10 years on. That had dramatised elements in it, but it was a factual film. It was driven by interview and by testimony. That's where its sort of narrative propulsion came from. So I never say never, but I really believe in the power of factual storytelling. And I believe, actually, one of the things I was going to get onto, are we onto this now? Is that you know, one of the things that I'm very, very aware of in terms of sort of world events and where we are in the world is that testimony from people who witness things is incredibly powerful. And of course, if you're doing the Romans, you're doing Pompeii, they're not around to tell you that story. But I'm more interested, not exclusively, but more interested in how we tell 20th century stories with living people, and we use testimony both as a sort of broadcaster of record, but also because I think it brings stories, you know, if people are around, they're the people to bring the stories to life for you.
Ed, is history a mainstay of your specialist factual output?
So I don't want to be a contrarian. Yeah, but unfortunately I'm going to be one. For me, specialist factual is not about genre, first and foremost. So I don't ever go, oh, right, okay, here's a history thing. People often don't like history, but I'm going to try and tell it in a new and interesting way, and therefore that's specialist. For me, it's about the biggest stories and, more importantly, the biggest questions that we try and answer and set questions that people maybe didn't even know they needed to hear.
Give us an example.
So, okay, so the clip that I want to show now is a show that we've commissioned by Betty. It's got a working title called Men of Iron. And actually, its genesis was a bit of Olympic programming. So those of you who don't know, Discovery has the rights for the Olympics for the next decade. And so this is a bit of support programming that's going to sit on our networks. And so when I look at specialist factual, I look at stories and questions that are channel agnostic, so they can play anywhere. They could play on Discovery, they could play on Eurosport, they could play on Quest, on a variety of our platforms internationally. So Men of Iron poses some really, really big questions. I guess the first one is, what does it take to be an Olympian? What does it mean to be an Olympian? Because
I'll pause you there.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at it, and then you can...
Well, hold on. Let me just finish off this one thing, and then we'll play the clip. It's just a very quick one. So, and the second question is about the Olympics. So the Olympics, I think people look at the Olympics and go, it's the embodiment of physical perfection. And so this special, this is a 90-minute special, is going to challenge all that.
What happened next?
Oh, you have to watch to find out. So for me, I think that it does pose some really interesting conversations to be had around physicality and body image, and the thought that, okay, so I might have a leg made out of flesh and bone and sinew, and you might have a leg that's made out of polycarbonate fibre or metal, and is my leg any better than your leg? And I think it raises some really, really interesting questions, and that's one of the things that we'll be answering, or hope to answer, in that show.
It feels quite science-based.
Well, I think, again, going back to what specialist factual is, it's about taking sometimes niche subjects and bringing them to a wider populist audience and making you consider things that you might otherwise never have considered. And it's about having the confidence to do that. And that's why I feel that it's not just about a different way into Rome or a different way into whatever. It's genuinely about trying to seek out those really interesting, compelling stories and giving them a wider platform.
But I don't want to speak for Lucy, but I certainly don't commission history, and my team don't commission history because we have a sort of obligation to commission history. I don't think our starting point is what we're going to do in history this week and what we're going to do in science this week. I think, my interpretation of specialist factual is the same as it's always been, and so forgive me because I've said it before on panels, which is just, I think everything that we commission is an attempt to help the audience to make sense of the world in which we live now. And I think that's true of Planet Earth 2, and it's true of Muslims Like Us, and it's true of all the other programs that I've cited. And I think the audience rewards you, both in terms of the volume of people who come and their appreciation, with the integrity of the question. I think we spend a lot of time interrogating what is that question, what are the most important questions of our time, and you deliver the answer to those questions in a multiplicity of ways. Sometimes the question's very sort of on the surface. You say it in the pre-title, this is a film, hopefully you don't say this is a film about this, but an iteration of this is a film about this. At other times, I think you make the audience or reward the audience by making them work harder because the question emerges through the film. But none of it for me is, what's this week's science box, back to boxes, science box, history box, religion box, which is sort of why, even though in my team I have commissioners who have specialisms, who concentrate on particular things, we talk a lot about what each of us are doing and developing, because there is I can't think of a single program we've made which is very, very specifically a science program or very, very specifically a history program. They're about other things.
If you're always going for the big question, Ed, where's the role for returning brands within that slate? How does that work?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, does specialist factual then cease to be specialist when they become part of the mainstream? I mean, for me, the answer is no. So I think that, for instance, maybe Gogglebox or SAS Who Dares Wins or any of those, they started their life off as specialists. But then once they become part of the language of populist television, then for me, they've dropped off the edge of being specialist, of being cutting edge, bleeding edge, whatever phrase you want to use. And therefore, the role of specialist factual is always to be kind of finding new boundaries, new stories, new bigger questions. And so, so to go back to returning brands, say that show, I really hope it will be enormously successful, and I commission another 6 more. Is that then still really specialist? For me, it's become populist.
Can I jump in on that? I think this is a dangerous opposition. I don't think it's specialist versus populist. I don't think specialist is a sort of synonym for small or niche. I mean, basically, no viewer cares what it is, right? It's not sort of, no one sits down and goes, watch a specialist factual programme. My mum doesn't know what it is. I have to explain to her what my job title means, et cetera, et cetera. But it has a role in the sort of panoply of sort of television, factual television, which is, it is a more analytical and contextual sort of way of coming at subjects than pure human narrative, right? So I think specialist factual programmes are the ones that sort of are curious, that look around the corner, that hold up bits of the world and sort of examine them. And I would rather, it's a useful definition internally because it makes sure we're covering that bit of factual. Externally, I wouldn't want to sort of, make a big play of it.
I think the other thing that's interesting about that is because they are analytical rather than simply about human experience in the way that documentary tends to be led by character. Their specialist factual programs are ultimately much more scalable in many ways than documentaries are. You can make a great documentary that's memorable, but you can make a huge specialist factual program in a way that is quite difficult to make a huge documentary. And I think in this world where we're all looking for scale, it actually gives specialist factual an advantage that documentary kind of doesn't readily have. I found this year where I've been in particular looking at ways of scaling programs up and then scaling them up again and then scaling them up some more. Sometimes it's the classic specialist factual subject areas, whether it be history or in particular geography, science, the world around us, the world we live in, that actually lends itself to this really big scale approach.
Although you don't want, when I left the BBC, they were in the middle of making the history of the world and life. And I just was like thinking, okay, where do you go from here? It's like there is no sort of possible scaling. So I think the best things we've done at scale have basically taken the kernel of something really purely specialist factual and then thought, what is the craziest way to do this, right? What's the most, crash a plane, send people 4,000 miles across the open ocean in a boat, build the biggest wall of death there ever was, mummify a taxi driver. We're about to do a show at the moment that builds a model railway track from one side of Scotland to the other. These kind of audacious undertakings that start with the sort of like, okay, we're going to find some sort of kernel of specialist factual at the heart of them, are really, really important. The other point about documentaries is I sort of don't think these two things are quite as in opposition as has been, as the sort of seating plan of a commissioning department would lead you to believe. And one of the challenges that one of the things, the most interesting creative conversations that I have with producers and with a team are about how you can have what I think of as proper television storytelling, i.e. people you care about doing exciting things on camera with a reason, stick to the end, and emotion and all the rest of it, and the analysis, without the analysis killing the action and getting in the way. Because I've worked on those drama docs where like the action's flowing and then suddenly it stops and someone pops up and says in a talking head, yeah, it really would happen like this. And you just think, it's the end of, that's the last thing you want. But when you get into that kind of almost, to take an example, Sarah Ramsden's commission, RDF's Secret Life of 4 or 5 year olds, that's almost like a sports commentary model, right? So like sports commentary has over the years evolved a way of making sure that the action isn't interrupted by the analysis. And what you therefore have is these two arenas. You've got the arena where the kids are sort of doing what they're doing in a pure documentary storytelling way, and you've got the arena where the scientists are watching them and commenting on the action and interacting themselves. And you can bounce between the two, and that's not a sort of, it's not stop for the science bit. That's
it's
a sort of brilliant
Gogglebox.
It's a sort of brilliant way, exactly. It's a brilliant way of sort of innovating in storytelling. We're trying to sort of push that further.
I would agree with John though that I think the viewers at home and definitely our viewers at Channel 5 just aren't really interested in labels. They're not really interested in what's called specialist factual, exactly what specialist factual is. They just tune in because they want to see that program and they want to engage with it. And I think at the end of the day, it's about coming up with the idea that's going to have an element of intelligence, but is going to connect with your own particular audience. And actually, what works on Channel 4 might not work on Channel 5. What works on Nat Geo might, So I think what we all do is work very, very hard to know our audiences and to know what will resonate with them and to know what they'll like. But I'm always a bit wary about the label specialist factual. I think it is just something that commissioners like to sit around and talk about.
Well, yeah,
the
specialist factual
viewers don't care.
We do this every year on every panel.
I know, we do. What is specialist factual? It doesn't matter. I know.
Can I say two more? Sorry, two things just to pick up on that. So I think the first thing is, I think we sometimes, and I've been on these panels many, many times, I think we underestimate sometimes, not everyone here, but generally in television, the audience's appetite for knowledge. So I don't think the question is about, do the audience want knowledge? I think the question is about how you deliver that knowledge in the best way. And then just on the point of scale, I think, yes, we're all going to say we want things of scale. I think the thing that we sometimes get wrong is scale isn't the end of the story. It isn't just pump it up and make it as big as you possibly can. I think it's about sort of matching the idea to the right scale for it. And I think often when things are scaled up, it exposes the heart of the idea. Some ideas simply aren't designed to be a 4-hour stripped event played live across a week. Some of them luckily are. But I think one of the things that my team, I hope, are really good at when people come and talk about ideas is, yes, of course, sometimes, if this isn't saying don't bring things of ambition to me, do, but we're not going to commission things just because they are the biggest idea of this year.
Yes, could I pick up on that, Ninder, actually, because there's I think on this question of how do you scale up an idea to make it genuinely feel bigger than something that's gone before. There's a very good example, which I've got a clip of, actually, which I'd love to show. And this is something which has come from Newtopia, which is Jane Root's production company here in London. And they wanted to do a program which was about earth sciences, effectively, about the earth and the earth in space and the fact that there's so many anomalies about the planet that we live on that makes it this exact kind of Goldilocks place, neither too hot nor too cold, so life can live there. And, ultimately, so far it sounds like what a specialist factual program would look like. But I think one of the things that really unlocked this for us was that they teamed up with the avant-garde Hollywood filmmaker Darren Aronofsky. I think it's an unusual man to choose to make a specialist factual program. But with Aronofsky's kind of filmmaking vision and flair, and also, frankly, the budget to work with that. He was then able to work with the Newtopia guys to create what I think is a really kind of poetic, different feeling, memorable, and a highly unusual piece of program making, which isn't just a 4-hour show, it's like 10 hours of earth sciences, which again is something which you normally would think, well, is anyone going to watch 10 hours? But I think once you find the right kind of almost sort of poetic structure for the thing, you really can hold it for that length. And everything that they shot for this was, they're not using any archive, they've freshly shot everything, and really it's the Earth as you've never seen it before. So I don't know if this would be a good opportunity to roll the clip, or if you're going to make me come back to that.
Well, you've slightly hijacked the running order, but I'm sure that we can respond. Can we show Hamish's clip now, please? Hamish, that really is scale. A lot of the audience here are much smaller producers than Aronofsky. How on earth can they?
It's a very good question. I mean, and people do kind of say to me, well, if you're just working with Ron Howard and Darren Aronofsky now, I might as well not come and pitch to you. But actually, the biggest companies don't necessarily generate the biggest ideas. I would say two things about that. For one, I do think that the UK has got the foremost specialist factual production community in the world. The talent and the range of ideas that get generated from the UK are really second to none. And so people here really can generate the big ideas. And even if you're a comparatively small company, if you come in with a great idea that is visionary and new and has got the kind of components that can work together to make the thing stand out, we are also very happy and very eager in a way to team people up with other companies that might help them, or find another piece of talent for elsewhere that might help to complete the picture. And actually some of the best ideas that we're generating at the moment have been big ideas from small companies that are now big ideas that they're working on over a much bigger canvas. So please don't be put off. You don't have to have Darren Aronofsky come into the pitch for us to commission the idea. I've
got an anonymous question here. One of them was about small indies. Another is that Nat Geo's been briefing producers to make their ideas look $1 million. Tom McDonald has been asking for ideas in history and science that match the ambition of Planet Earth 2. Where does the arms race between broadcasters for ever more expensive premium content end? And does it really further the form of specialist factual?
Well, if it makes another Planet Earth 2, then great. You know, I mean, there's a sort of, it's part of what we should be doing, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, and I think for me, I think I've articulated this already. I don't want everything on the slate to look like Planet Earth 2, but one of the things that Planet Earth 2 has certainly made me feel really confident about is that, like I said at the beginning, you can bring a really big, broad audience to Specialist Factual, and there is still an appetite from the audience for what's been known in the past as sort of awe and wonder, and I think Hamish's clip is full of awe and wonder, and I think so was Planet Earth 2. And there is absolutely no reason why science, which I guess is what underpins, I guess to some extent, One Strange Rock, why science and history can't have the scale of ambition as Planet Earth 2 did. I guess my sort of note of caution is, I think you can you can make an idea so big that it becomes meaningless. And I think, you know, Planet Earth 2 has a sort of, it has the power of a brand behind it, but I also think it had an integrity. If it hadn't been as good as Planet Earth 1, people would have said so. So I think it isn't, again, for me, it's not just make it big, make it big, make it big. It's about going, find the perfect size for the right idea. But I think all of us are saying the same thing, which is, wouldn't it be amazing if we could commission, there was a habit at the BBC, certainly in science and history, to commission lots and lots and lots of 3-part series. And there are lots of reasons why I don't think that's the right thing for us to do, not least because there isn't the marketing spend to back every single one of those series, but also because I think the shape of those series began to make those titles slide off the audience's eyeballs a bit, because they went, oh, another 3-part series, which will be terribly polite, and it will have a nice presenter on it, and it will do this. And actually, the truth is, some of those series inevitably were better than others, but they became hard to distinguish between. So I guess what I'm saying is, help me and my team help the audience really distinguish between those ideas.
Yeah, so help me help you. Yes.
Help me to help you. Let's all help each other.
So Tom, just staying with that idea of the perfect shape for the right idea, if we could just line up Tom's clip now, maybe you can...
Can I talk first about it? Because it might seem like a strange choice. So I think that the thing to say before this clip is ambition comes in all shapes and sizes, and it's inevitable on a panel like this that will spend more time talking about Planet Earth 2 or SAS or the things which sort of play for weeks and weeks and do millions of numbers than the smaller pieces. And so this, I guess my point about ambition is that what I'm about to show is a project which has been in production since 2012. It's a longitudinal access documentary series with science at the heart of it about a double-blind placebo trial for a new Parkinson's drug. What you're about to see, I think you'll probably think is very quiet and small, but I genuinely believe that it's something that only the BBC would commit to. It's made by a very, very, very small indie, essentially a one-woman band. She's lived this series along with the participants in this trial for many years. And the thing you should know is that we filmed with a number of people, some of whom are on a placebo, some of whom are on the drug, which may or may not be an answer to Parkinson's in the future. And to this date, we still don't know who was on the drug and who wasn't on the drug. And TX will only happen once a science paper in a reputable journal has been published later this year. So it's been, I usually say this about natural history, it's over 100 days of filming. We've been filming it for 5 years. And I think, again, this is very, very rough, but I think it's something that, I certainly feel very proud that as a department we've committed to it for this long. So here's a clip from the Parkinson's trial. And what's sort of extraordinary is that was filmed in 2013, and we're still following those people now, and that's the beginning of what is actually an incredibly brutal procedure, because the only way to get the drug administered into the brain is to create a port on the side of the head, and it's essentially you're drilled with a bit here on the side of your head, and the drug is infused through that port. So it's been a sort of genuinely extraordinary thing, and I guess partly the reason I want to show it is I don't want people to walk out of this thinking ambition has to look just like Planet Earth 2. I think this is ambition, and I think longitudinal access is genuinely rewarded. So £15 billion railway, which is our Crossrail documentary series, I just checked before the panel started, is the highest rated programme on BBC Two this year to date. We've been filming with Crossrail now for 4 and a bit years. We've done 2 series with them. We're already talking about longitudinal access for 2022, 2023 with other organisations. And I think when you commission something like this, you have to be pretty generous in some ways as a commissioner, because chances are you won't be doing the job by the time it's on the
and do you
telly.
feel that's something that the BBC...
I mean, I don't want to say that other broadcasters wouldn't do it, because I'm sure they would. But I certainly feel there's a confidence in, the fact that this is a big science story. Obviously, that sequence felt very, very docu, but this is a big science series which we've committed to 4 or 5 years. And actually, what was really interesting about when this was commissioned is that it was made very, very clear to us that it could only be broadcast when that science paper was published, and it could be anything between 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. And we made a commitment not knowing when we might be able to broadcast it. I don't want to say we'll be able to broadcast it this year, because I said that last year, so who knows? But one day it will be on the television. And I think when it's on, and this isn't just a sort of, showy-offy again, like, hey, God, look, we've got a series that's been in production for 5 years. I think it befits it. I think it requires patience, and I think that's something that commissioners, myself included, aren't always known for.
John,
it's a wonderful clip. It's sort of moving, isn't it? Even in a very short, even if you don't have the whole backstory. And it's a perfect illustration of that thing I was talking about managing to blend doc storytelling and specialist factual content without sort of stopping one for the other. So it looks really powerful. I mean, just to say, obviously, we're in the middle of a number of equally sort of longitudinal projects. A lot of broadcasters are. We've got a 16-year, well, it looks like a 16-year project with a video artist who's filming time-lapse at the World Trade Center. We did cheat slightly and show a film at the halfway stage because it was just so good. We wanted to get a bit of it out. But that's ongoing. There's other longitudinal projects there. It is a useful reminder that there are other ways of making an impact. But it's almost like there's different ways to cut through, aren't there? It's that trick of, sometimes it's standing with a megaphone and shouting, and sometimes it's standing there and going quiet until the room goes quiet and then speaking. But it is, if that's not an overextended metaphor. But I just think, we all need to find ways of getting heard in an ever more crowded landscape, and that's one of them.
So John, Hamish is talking about Ron Howard and Darren Aronofsky, for Nat Geo. What's the role of talent for you at Channel 4?
Well, just before I answer that, can I just say something about the clip? Because I thought it was brilliant, but it is also interesting. It was really sort of amazing imagery, but it's kind of interesting that 3 of us on this panel are basically making a show that is effectively Earth from space, right? So ours went out in April, and if you want to tease out the differences between the broadcasters, it's quite a useful case study, right? So ours was it was from Arrow, beautiful job, very, very focused on how humanity had changed the Earth over the last 40 years, and it was broadcast on Earth Day. So that's us. I mean, I think it's one of the things that we tend to have a much more focused proposition. The topic is never a sort of, the proposition. The one that, Tom can talk to the one that he's announced, but that feels a sort of broader, more all-encompassing sort of BBC One-ish type sort of thing, and then yours is there with a sort of film director. So I think there's a sort of interesting, if you want to know what the difference is between the channels, sometimes you go to the sort of treatment of the same subject area. Sorry, to talk about talent, it's a major priority for us at the moment. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I was doing the audit of you'd asked me for some sort of like how many hours did we do. And I realised, I'd always known that we did a lot without presenters, but 3/4 of our specialist factual hours this year are without a presenter, which is an indication of how sort of docu and how actuality-led a lot of our slate has gone. And we've got brilliant talent, but we want more and we want to broaden it. And so that is, hopefully for the next year, that'll be a priority for us. We've spent a lot of time chasing male audiences for a channel that is skews female and a medium that skews female. I think we're in danger of overcorrecting in that direction, so we want to keep that stream of work going and broaden out. We've ended up quite white. I sort of think we need to broaden out as well. So the work is underway on that. There's 8 series in production with new female talent. There are 6 in development. There's equal amount of work going on finding BME presenters and on-screen talent. But there's a particular kind of Channel 4 talent that we're looking for, and I've brought a clip, if I can play it in a moment, that I think will illustrate this. Maybe I should play the clip, and then I can talk about the kind of person we're looking for. This is actually again, I don't know if it counts as an arts film or a specialist factual film. It's basically...
but arts is in your specialist
it's the same thing, right, exactly. But what I mean is it's a sort of hybrid project. We're doing a big AI season this autumn, and one of the things we're doing is sending the dancer and choreographer Akram Khan off to examine the world's most extraordinary robots. And the reason we're sending him is he is a world expert on movement. And as you'll see from this clip, when he meets the robots, he can do things that I couldn't. So it's so interesting in this year of mega specialist factual that we've both Tom and I have chosen clips of the smaller things on our slate. So just to sort of pick up on that point, it's just worth saying for all those of you who are sitting there looking at Lev, Guy, Martin, SAS, Secret Life, Mutiny, Spies, the sort of things of huge scale. There is the range on the Channel 4 as well. But also the reason I wanted to play that is because we need a particular kind of person, right? We have our specialist factual presenters are people whose authority comes from them living it. They're the real deal, right? We almost never, ever have people delivering facts down the lens. We learn things by watching people do things. So you need someone who's completely immersed in and living their subject. And you want people who've got a different angle on the world and who've got a sort of, they're often quite idiosyncratic. They're not polished presenters. It's not their day job. It's not, what they're very rarely TV professionals. But Akram, in the same way that, that's an extension in some ways of what we've been doing with Grayson Perry. In the same way that Grayson notices decor and can decode it in a way that I can't, that's because he's an artist. Akram can see gesture and movement. He's a sort of modern Desmond Morris, but we're setting him not sort of humans to look at, but the successor race. So it's a kind of, that's a little bit of a clue as to the kind of thing we're after.
And can I just ask, that idea, did it come to you as Akram Khan on AI? Or?
Oh no, that had a long and torturous evolution. Do you want me to tell the story very briefly?
tell us it briefly.
I'll give you the short version, right?
Time's running out, not because
okay, so what happened with that was I'd been thinking, love Grayson, what else can we do? There must be other people who can do things like this. And then Akram did a show called Dust that eventually went to Glastonbury, and 3 people saw it in the 1 week. I saw it, Madonna Benjamin in documentary saw it, Neil Crombie at Swan saw it. Neil phoned us and said, love this guy, it's an amazing show. We all had a sort of moment about the show. I came out of it sort of shaking. And we said, all right, if you love him, go and ask him what he wants to do. So he went and asked him, we all met him in different configurations. He wanted to do modern distribution centres. The world of modern distribution. So Neil has sent me a bunch of pictures, sort of like Andres Gursky type pictures of sort of huge factory floors. And I thought that's sort of interesting. It's like where your one-click order goes. It makes sense because it's a largely migrant workforce, and Akram was the sort of generation of migrants before that. So we sort of set off down that path. And because his diary was full, we thought I'll turn up when it turns up, and it'll be an exciting film. About 6 months in, Swan came to me and said, access is a bit tricky, and also it sort of turns out that Akram, what he's really interested in is robots, and not really distribution centres, because every time we go to one without a robot, he's not really interested. So then we said, okay, well, we've been having a whole series of ideas. I mean, I've got this obsession with trying to sort of work out what we should be talking about now, I think very strongly, and of course AI is a big, big issue, and a bunch of other ideas are sort of clustered around what could have been an AI season. And as with often with seasons, you can sort of see the last piece of the jigsaw comes in, you think, oh, well, I stuck that with this, and then work that one up a bit. We've got a moment on the channel. So it was sort of changed to a commission about robots, and Akram's been very happy ever since. And that's mid-shoot. That's just from the Japan shoot. They're about to go to the States. It won't turn up for a bit. But I'm excited by him. I think he's got something, and I think he's got something that most people don't bring to the subject matter and might just broaden out beyond the quite rarefied world of contemporary.
Yeah, I find that really interesting, because I think that the quality that the lyrical and poetic author can sometimes bring to something which you just don't really think would be a very good forum for being lyrical and poetic, can sometimes really unlock these programs in a way that you wouldn't expect, and when you watch them it makes them ultra memorable and often just far more enjoyable than they would otherwise be. I think one of the places where that's applying at the moment is in archive documentary. I think there's a whole new approach to archive documentary that I'm personally really interested in commissioning, where people are really building stories in a way which has a kind of a sort of emotional storytelling about it, often because it's very much the view of one person. I think O.J. Made in America did it really well. I think the Run
LA, in the O.J. film.
Completely.
And so can I just
the LA 92
bring
run.
Lucy into that? So Lucy, what's the role of talent on Channel 5?
Yeah, I mean, talent is incredibly important to us, but we're always thinking about talent in terms of our audience. So who is going to connect with our audience, and who is going to help our audience into that subject matter? So that's really, really important to us, because they're the gatekeeper, if you like, for that particular subject, and we need to carry them along on the journey, and the presenter is really important to us to help us do that. But actually, aside from presenting talent, we're also, increasingly interested in casting. It sounds like there's a waterfall somewhere. And actually, with our Elizabeth project, we talked long and hard our sort of drama doc hybrid, back to sort of Tom's point, but it's something we love at Channel 5, and we're actually doing more of it. We're getting very excited about it, and it seems to be working for us. I mean, Elizabeth was getting 1.5 million consolidated, which for us at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night is, for history, is actually really significant. Usually we might be putting history on sort of Friday at 9, but actually we've brought it into the heart of the schedule, and it's really nice to see it working. But we sort of talked long and hard about the casting of Elizabeth, and actually Chris, the director, came up and worked very, very hard, actually, and came up with, I thought, a sort of inspired piece of casting with Lily Cole. And it was then quite interesting to see what happened once we had Lily on board, because, the press department got very excited, the marketing team got very excited, and suddenly the entire project and proposition grew and became bigger. So, we had billboards, we had obviously on-air promos, we had adverts in the TV newspapers, and I think that really helps, again, bring an audience. And the other thing I was going to say is I know I keep talking about audience, but it's so key to us. We work really hard on knowing them very well, is that we do these kind of market research things afterwards where, you'll interview various people and they'll tell you what they thought about the programme. I sometimes think that perhaps the research department just tends to show us the nice ones so that we don't get upset as commissioners. But anyway, there was one that I saw, a sort of bunch of comments after the Elizabeth documentary, and there was a sort of a young woman, she was probably in her early 20s, and it just sort of really struck me, and I hadn't particularly thought about this before, but she said, I love history, but I don't really watch that much history on TV because I often find it a little bit dry, and I find it doesn't really relate to me or resonate with me. But when I saw that Lily Cole was cast as Elizabeth, I thought, oh, that feels exciting. And then she said, it's almost like you're beginning to make history for millennials. And I thought, well, it's not something that we'd deliberately done, but I thought actually that was really interesting, and it made me think quite a lot about how you begin to try and capture that quite elusive specialist factual millennial audience.
In a moment, I'm going to come to each of you to talk in a bit of detail about how to specifically work with your departments, but I just wanted to hear from Ed and Tom about talent and the role of talent, on-screen talent.
So very, very quickly because I know we're running out of time. I think, we've got an extraordinary roster of talent. The one thing I would say is I would love I'd love more voices across the channels with opinion and point of view. I think the talent who really resonate with our audience, whether you think about Mary Beard or David Lashoga in history, they have a point of view they've got to take, and that's beyond just knowledge. Expertise is really, really important for all the BBC channels in Specialist Factual, and all of the people that we work with are really knowledgeable. The ones who stand out have a take. They have a sort of idiosyncrasy about them. And it's weird because I'm pretty sure I said this last year, and you think as a commissioner that one of the things that will happen is you get deluged by talent. You really, really don't. And I know as a programme maker that great talent's hard to find, but it is genuinely a brilliant way in, if we're talking about ways in, for us to start with talent and build from there. And I'd like to see more of that. I think there's lots and lots and lots of opportunity for us across BBC 1, 2 and 4 for talent. On the other hand, speaking of what John just said, a lot of what we've commissioned this year, I was just looking at the history roster in particular for next year. It compared to previous years, it's very undependent, that's not a word, it depends much less on talent. And we're doing a lot of pieces which don't have talent attached at all, partly because they're pieces which are driven by archive, to Hamish's point, but also pieces which are using talent in a different way, so it's not owned by one piece of talent, but by multiple voices. So I think the days of, we're going to make 8 series a year on BBC Two with 8 different presenters on 8 different subjects is gone, but I think that there's a role for talent, and there's talent coming on the channels this year who will be new to the channel and new to broadcasting, who I'm really, really excited about. So we'll see.
So talent for us is, obviously we've been in the talent game for a long time. Faces for the Channel is something that will bring you audiences that can sit on many different platforms, is very, very important. And, if you look at Quest Red, we've got, Ed Stafford, for instance. One thing I would say to producers is that talent for us, they must be authentic. They're genuine experts in their fields, I think. In fact, it's kind of mirroring what I think John said earlier, is that we don't just have a presenter for hire, is that they're people that live and breathe these worlds, and so therefore are experts in them.
Okay, so just drilling down now into how to get a specialist factual commission. Tom, do you want to just give us an overview of your department, because you've got quite a few people in your department, and how best to access them, not just, we never say no to a meeting or drop us a line, but, are there any secrets, so anything you can give us, tips you can give us?
So first, the official bit, you must submit your ideas by BBC Pitch. I've got to say that. You have to submit your ideas by BBC Pitch. But beyond that, it's a really exciting moment for me because my team are fully in place after a period of sort of change and restructure and 2 departments merging together. And I think for my team, that's been a, bouncy period of time, and it's difficult when 2 departments merge. But we're all in place, so just very, very quickly, Craig Hunter is the lead commissioner on science, Fatima Salaria is the lead commissioner on religion, Simon Young is the lead commissioner on history, and he's just joined us. And then working in the department as commissioning editor with a slightly more broader remit are Diani Pesley, who is focusing on science, but is also doing some natural history and is also sort of doing an amazing job of taking the lion's share of the slate on BBC 4, and I think doing it rather brilliantly. And then Abigail Priddle, who's just joined the department and will be commissioning history and religion. So, in a nutshell, obviously, if you have an established relationship, either because they all worked out in the indie sector or they all worked, within the BBC in production, all of them have production backgrounds, all of them have made programmes, then obviously start your relationship with my team there. The thing to say is, we all meet every single week for 2 hours and we talk about ideas. So to some degree, it doesn't matter which sort of door you decide to use to get in the first place, all points sort of lead to the same place. We talk about all the ideas before we discuss them with the channel, we debate those ideas, we fight over which ones we want to do, there's limited resource, we have really, really robust conversations. But I would say it starts with, I wish that everyone on my team had the time to meet every single supplier that requests a meeting. And I know, having been on the other side, that it can seem incredibly rude for someone to go, I just don't have time to meet you now, can you please send your ideas? So I would say start first with an email, Obviously, meetings are great, but start with an email and a sort of headline, at least, of what the idea is, and we'll go from there. I don't think, eventually, we might get to a stage where we ask for long and longish proposals. In the first instance, I think the thing to do is keep it short and pithy, which I'm not doing very brilliantly, but short, sweet, email.
John, you similarly have a few commissioning editors.
Everything he said except different names, basically.
But also, you have your
I'll say who the
newsletter.
people are, right? So
Yeah.
but the methodology is saying email first, just because it saves you sort of coming all the way to Channel 4 for a meeting and then walking in the door and discovering that the idea has already been done or something. You should use the meetings for expanding on the ideas rather than for sort of filtering them. Anyway, my team, also recently in place, also it's a delight. It is so good having a team, isn't it? So nice. Last after not having one. There are four of them. Sarah Ramsden looks after science and specialist factual events. Rob Coldstream looks after history. Sheminder Nahar looks after topical specialist factual. That's everything that doesn't fit into any of those categories and everything that sort of is about. I mean, the channel, for example, is hers. It's the sort of classic attempt to sort of find a specialist factual lens on a contemporary subject. And then Alf Laurie looks after travel and adventure. All of us play slightly outside our briefs, otherwise Gogglebox would never have come out as specialist factual, for example. All of us have got particular interested in idiosyncrasies. One of the really, I've got a little bit of a love thing going on for the team, because they're such an interesting group of minds and sort of different on so many different axes that the kind of moment when they all come together, you just sort of also realise that whatever people's subject matters, there's also just a whole sort of style of thinking. So I would say, in the first instance, send your idea to the person who's got the sort of genre brief that it fits into. But if you just particularly like someone's way of thinking or the way that they work, or you click with them in some way, don't worry too much about that. Just send it to them. As Tom says, it all comes into the middle in the end.
And can you just give us one sentence on how to get into your newsletter?
Yes, right. So hopefully this is working, right? But I try and write a thing every quarter that just sort of says, here's what we've done recently and here's what we're looking for at the moment. And I can't find a scientific way to sort of make a comprehensive mailing list. So the deal is, everybody who's speaking to us or has emailed me in the last sort of year gets a copy. Anyone else who wants one, send me an email. We'll stick you on the list.
Fantastic. Lucy, can you briefly tell us the best way to get to Channel 5 Specialist Factual? Just so we've got time for a couple of questions.
Very quickly, Tom's whole department is about the size of the Channel 5 commissioning team in total. So at Channel 5, as I said earlier, we don't have genre commissioners. Having said that, I commission more specialist factual than anyone else, but Guy Davies, who I think is in the audience here, also commissions some specialist factual. So I would say pick the commissioner that you think you connect with and that you resonate with. Like the other two, I would say initially, please don't send any more than half a page. You know, we really try and encourage people not to do too much work. And if that half page looks good, and the half page really needs to be sort of, you know, what the idea is in short form, then we'll get back to you, and then I'll ask you for a bit more information. The difference, I suppose, between the others and the system that we have in place actually at Channel 5 is that we have budget round now, and I don't think the others have that anymore. So 4 times a year, we as commissioners pitch our ideas to a panel. It's a bit like the X Factor and can be as scary. And we take our ideas in, which we've whittled down. We take in about 10 each. And, you know, we'll probably get, I think last time of that 10, I probably had 7 commissioned. So I think if you get that to the point that your idea is being taken into budget round, it isn't guaranteed, but you're in quite a good place with it. And if you're at the point where we might be taking it into budget round, that's when we'll start asking you to do a bit more work on it, because it really is worth it at that point.
Thanks. Hamish?
Well, yeah, I suppose number one, watch the channel. Seems obvious.
Yeah.
Surprising number of people don't.
Yeah.
And if you don't, and you come to a commissioning meeting, it won't go well. We're a very good conduit for getting stuff into the US channel, because we're fundamentally part of the commissioning process in the US. We also do commission programs which are for international only. That means everywhere outside of the US, and those programs are commissioned on slightly more traditional budgets and are more the traditional returning type shows. We've got a team in London, Carolyn Payne, who's here, Sue Davidson, we've got Ben Newt, who does the acquisitions and co-productions, and so you can come and bring ideas to any of them. And yeah, we're looking for ideas with presenters. We're looking for ideas that will translate and across all countries and not feel too parochial, too UK-centric or things that will maybe work in one place and not another. But we can help to advise, and we're very keen to engage with new companies.
Fantastic. Big ambitious ideas. To Hamish. Ed?
Yeah, okay, so pretty much the same, really. So if you want ideas to go to the US for discovery only, Andrew O'Connell's the person you want to speak to. For all other ideas, UK and international, excuse me first. You've also got Victoria Noble, who commissions for Quest and for Factual channels, and Charlotte Reed, who commissions for Quest Red and kind of Fact-Ent ideas.
Fantastic. I'm being told that our time is up. All of the panel will be working their way outside, so if you have a specific question for them, please grab them on their way out. Don't storm the stage. I've been told to tell you not to do that, because this isn't Glastonbury. So it just remains for me to thank very much Lucy, John, Hamish, Ed and Tom. Thank you all very much for coming. I hope it's been helpful.
Thank you.